Game number 3 is in the books, and this is an exciting one. Wow, what a game it just finished. D4 by Gukesh. He played E4 in game number 1. Ding Loren surprised him with the French defense, so Gukesh says, all right, let's try D4. Let's see what you have cooked up. Knight F6 by Ding, which is a nice flexible move. And then we see another flexible move by Gukesh, Knight to F3. If you play C4 right away, the most common move, this allows sometimes black to play something like the Nimzo Indian or the Queen's Indian defense, but Knight F3 sort of limits the options for black. Almost everyone here is playing D5 at the top levels. That's what we see. Pawn C4, and now we're in Queen's Gambit territory. Most common move is E6, Queen's Gambit declined. C takes D, E takes D, and this is called the QGD, or the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. Very common at the top levels. Knight C3, C6. This supports the center. It's just this ultra solid position for black. And these positions are very close to equal, but there's this dynamic of the pawn structure. White's missing the C pawn, black's missing the E pawn. Queen C2. The idea of Queen C2 is it blocks bishop to F5. And Ding goes G6. So he's saying, all right, I want to force this move, bishop to G5. And now we see a very rare move by Gukesh D. Bishop to G5 here, I think, was played over 500 times in the database. H3 was played about 6 times. And 2 of the games were played last year by none other than Vladimir Kramnik. So I'm starting a theory right now on this video that Kramnik might be helping Gukesh D prepare for his games. And even though Kramnik has had a lot of negative press lately, think about it in terms of who's one of the best opening theoreticians of all time, who's still alive, who's been a world champion, who has changed modern chess opening theory with the Berlin defense, with the Catalan for white. It's Vladimir Kramnik. So is it just a coincidence that this extremely rare move was played twice by Vladimir Kramnik? We'll find out. So H3. The idea with H3 is you eventually play G4 after the black bishop is sitting on F5. So bishop F5 played. And it feels like Ding has pretty much equalized this position. The computer's saying 0.0. Everything feels balanced. Queen B3 poking at the pawn. Queen B6 by Ding. And there's a theme forming where it seems like Ding is happy to go into endgames against Gukesh. And that's probably because Gukesh is such an aggressive player. G4 by Gukesh. That's the strongest move. And we do see this trend in the match too, where Gukesh D loves to push forward with his pawns. He loves to expand those pawns, gain that extra space. Queen takes, A takes B, and bishop C2, poking at this guy on B3. Now you might be wondering, are those double pawns weak? They're double-edged. Gukesh D does get this half-open file, and there's the chance to push this B pawn up the board and trying to undermine the C pawn. So the pawns aren't terrible, but the downside is bishop on C2 is threatening to sometimes win this pawn. So the best way to play this position for white is to either defend the pawn immediately or look at ways to trap this bishop if it were to go for the pawn. And Gukesh goes for the trap plan. Bishop F4. Now, if bishop takes B3 is played right away, there's knight to D2 attacking the bishop. Bishop can't come back because of rook C1, and if it tries to escape, F3 and the bishop gets trapped. And if bishop to C4, knight takes C, D takes C, E3 attacks this pawn. And if Ding plays stubbornly and tries to defend it, knight takes B5. After C takes B, bishop G2 on the long diagonal. No way to defend the rook. So that's a long variation, but essentially after bishop to F4, it's not a good idea to capture that pawn. We see H5, threatening H takes G, and this H pawn will be pinned down along the H file. Rook G1, takes, knight B to D7, knight to D2, defending this pawn, and threatening rook C1. So now Ding has to be careful. This bishop is going to be a theme of the game. Can he defend the bishop? Rook to G8, pawn to G5, gaining space on the king side. It does allow the bishop to potentially come back to F5. Knight H5, poking at the bishop. Rook H8. On the open file, he did his job on G8 because black was threatening G5 himself. But once white plays G5, it makes sense to get that rook active again. Black is never castling kingside. Pawn to f3. The idea with f3 is white wants to play e4. That's the new way to trap in the bishop, and it gains that space in the center. Gukesh loves space. He loves pressing the action. Knight g7, attacking the bishop with the rook. Bishop moves. Rook h5. This is a small mistake by Ding. Let's look at bishop to e7. This is the top move, and I'm going to show you why this move is better than rook h5. They both attack the g-pawn. But what's going to happen here is after e4, Gukesh tries to trap this bishop, or white would try to trap this bishop. This was not played in the game. Bishop takes g5, rook c1. If he goes for the trap, there is bishop takes d2 check, king takes, and bishop takes b3. Ding Liren would be able to save the bishop in that line. Okay, so in this position, bishop e7 is a way to save the bishop for now. There's no e4 followed by rook to c1. Instead, Ding plays rook h5. This is a small mistake. Pawn to e4 by Gukesh. D takes e4. F takes e4. And I think Ding might have been sleeping on the prospect of that bishop getting trapped, because now all of a sudden you see rook c1 coming, and how does the bishop move? Knight to e6 by Ding, attacking the d-pawn. Rook c1. Ding goes up a pawn, defends the bishop, but the problem is bishop to f2 attacks the defender of the bishop, removing the defender. Bishop g7 played. Now here, this is maybe what Ding missed. Now going back 5 or 6 moves, Ding might have thought this position is still equal, because if bishop takes d4 is played right away, bishop takes d4 back, hits the rook moves, and now there's bishop takes b3, and after knight takes, bishop to e3, forking rook and pawn. So in this line, Ding Liren would get 3 pawns for a knight. That's probably what he had calculated. That's my guess. But Gukesh finds the only move on the board to keep an advantage for white, knight to e2. Super strong. So instead of just removing that defender right away, instead he says, I'm going to attack you with the knight. After knight takes b3, rook takes c2. Now we see Gukesh is up 1 point of material because the g5 pawn is defended. And in this position, I was wondering about knight takes e2. The problem is bishop takes e2 attacks the rook on h5 while the bishop is still hanging. Okay, so knight e2 played. Knight takes b3. Rook takes c2. Knight takes d2. King takes d2. The dust settles. +1 for Gukesh. Worth noting, instead of a knight for 3 pawns, it's a bishop for 2 pawns, meaning Gukesh D has the bishop pair. And as we know, the bishop pair advantage can be worth an additional half a pawn. And this is something that computers have sort of figured out over time, and top GMs love the bishop pair. The computer eval here is 1.7. So you got 1 pawn is 1 point. The bishop pair is half a point. Then an additional 0.2, probably just from other aspects in the position, like the pressure against black's pawns. So 1.7 advantage. Usually a 2.0 advantage or higher means that it's a win with best play from both sides. So we're right at that territory of win versus draw. Let's see if Gukesh can increase the advantage and tie this matchup. Knight to e5 played. Nice centralizing move. Watch for knight to f3. It's a fork. Knight to d4, defending. Rook to d8, rook on the open file, pinning the knight down, renewing the threat. Knight f3, king e2 to defend. Rook h2, and Ding is pressing, pinning that bishop down. That threatens rook takes d4. That'd be a free piece. Bishop g2, blocking the pin. Pawn to a6. A prophylactic move by Ding. We're at move 28. Keep in mind we have to get to move 40. And the idea with a6 is white probably wants to play b4, b5, and undermine the pawn on c6. So by playing a6, Ding is saying, I'm not even going to give you that chance. b4, b5 makes no sense now because I will just capture with the a pawn. Pawn to b3. Rook to d7. Rook back to c1. And it looks like they're shuffling a little bit. We're at move 30. How is Gukesh D going to make progress? Okay, he brings the rook to the open file. Good idea. And look at Ding Liren. He's just waiting. He thinks he has a fortress here. He's making Gukesh D prove something. Bishop G3 hitting the rook and the knight. Rook drops back, pressuring H5. And now we see knight to F3 by Gukesh. I like this idea. He realized that he wasn't making any progress here, and this knight on E5 is a monster. Knight to F3 is trying to trade off the knight, and Gukesh, I think, wants to trade one set of rooks. He feels that trading one set of rooks increases his chances to play for the win. Knight takes, king takes. Bishop to G4, bishop to D4. Looking at this rook. Rook H1. And now there's a huge decision for Ding. And I was watching this live. Ding must have spent a minute on this move, and he had about 2 minutes on his clock. Or no, he had like a minute and 10 seconds on his clock, and he spent a minute on this move. He's sitting there thinking. They're on move 35. There is no increment. They have to get to move 40. And this is over the board chess where pieces knock over. Things happen. It takes a second or two to make each move, even if you play instantly. He ran his clock down to 9 seconds, deciding if he wants to play rook takes H1 or rook takes G5. And he played rook takes G5 with 9 seconds on the clock. So now he has to make 5 more moves in 9 seconds. Gukesh blitzes out bishop H3, poking at the rook. Ding plays F5. Gukesh goes bishop F4, and Gukesh had more time on the clock, but he was playing instantly because he had this all calculated, and he wanted to put the clock pressure on Ding. Rook H5, and now bishop takes F5, killer blow. Gukesh had this all planned out, beautiful calculation by Gukesh, and Ding flagged. Ding's clock ran out of time. The flag fell. Now, if you look deeper at this position, Gukesh D has increased his advantage. It's at least plus 4.5 now, so it's in completely winning territory. So it's not the end of the world that Ding Liren flagged, but you do want to focus on time management if you're Ding Liren. You don't want to get into the situations where you're trying to make 5 moves with 2 seconds each. That's just not good time management. Let's just look at a couple of the lines here. If rook takes H1, bishop takes D7 with check, king takes back, and rook takes H1. So Gukesh would be up a rook. If G takes F5, now there's rook takes H5, Gukesh is up a rook. If rook takes F5, E takes F5, G takes F5, Gukesh is up a rook. So no matter what, Gukesh has increased his advantage to being up a rook after bishop takes F5. What a move. What a finish. The match is now tied, and we have a rest day tomorrow, and I will be bringing you guys a recap for game number 4. I'm super excited for this match, even more excited than I was going into the match and after games 1 and 2, because now we've seen both sides secure a win. We're getting exciting chess, and I think we do have a potential to see a runaway victory by Gukesh D, which I would be excited about because he could be the next dominant world champion after Magnus Carlsen. All right, see you guys in the next video. Let me know in the comments, do you think Kramnik is a second for Gukesh D?